Okay, thank you for joining us. Before we start, I'll introduce my colleague and myself. So this is Paula. She's software development in our company, and she's probably the most experienced person in our team regarding the API platform. This is her contact email and Twitter account. My name is Antonio. I'm also working a lot with Symfony and API platform, and this is my email and Twitter account. Regarding our company, few words. We are based in Split, Croatia. We are attending this summer camp for last 5 years, I think. We are doing web and mobile development, also user experience and design things. Most of our backend things are built on Symfony. Also, we are doing training and consulting. We are organizing some events. And this is our website and our Twitter account. Okay, so this is few pictures of our team. And this is the start of our talk. Before we start, I just want to know a little bit about your background. So how many of you doesn't have any experience with the Symfony? Only one. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, before we start using API platform, it's based on Symfony, so we think you should know how to use Symfony, how to use some maybe advanced things like event listeners and some other things from the Symfony. Okay, why API? So this is the picture from API platform website. So we see that we have one access point for everything, for all kind of client devices. So basically the web has changed lately, and the way how we develop the application has changed. So basically we are building only one. Usually when we go with API first principles or things like that, we usually build one backend which provides the API for our data, and then we build all kind of clients devices. The reason for this is that because we don't have only the web applications anymore, we have all kinds like mobile applications, TV applications, I don't know, fridge, cars application, wherever you can develop any kind of client application, you can use REST APIs and build the client's application. So the API is the heart of the new web. It's a central point of reading, writing the data, holding the business logic, and in this way we are building at one place all the features we need. So we can share the same features through the different kinds of web applications or mobile applications or whatever. Also, the very important thing is that APIs are stateless. So for example, if you are using PHP, we don't have problem with session when we are scaling horizontal our application. Regarding the client's apps, it can be HTML single page application, it can be mobile or any kind of application. They are holding the presentation logic, and through the AJAX calls they are calling the API's endpoints and presenting the data to end user. It can be, if we are talking about web application, it can be hosted on CDN networks or things like that, and then we can also scale it quite easy. This is the picture how it looks like in production. So we have one web server or few web servers, and we have separated PHP web application for REST API, and we have HTML web application. They are totally separated, usually built by different kinds of teams and usually deployed on same server or different server. It doesn't important, but the communication is through the APIs, and API serves the data and client's application present that to the end user. What are the benefits? The benefits is the speed. So basically if we are talking about web application or mobile application, once when user downloads all the assets needs to make application look nice, he doesn't need to render anything, he just needs to take the data, show that to the user. So it's basically, if you are talking about SPA or single page application, it's shell model, and then once you download all the HTML files and assets, you just need to pull the data from the API server and show it to the end user. Also, it's quite easy to scale. It's much easier to scale. It's never easy to scale. Development comfort, so you can build REST APIs with Symfony, and then your front-end developers can use any JavaScript technology or framework to build the front-end application. Also, the long-term benefits when you have APIs as your backend solution, you don't need to build three kinds of same application, or you don't need to develop same feature for more than once. Also, in past, there was a search engine optimization problem, but now Google and other search engines can crawl JavaScript application, so it's not more problem anymore. Okay, something about format standards and patterns. So basically, when we are talking about this works, okay. About REST APIs, we are talking about HTTP, REST, and JSON. It's quite easy to use that. It's lightweight, it can work anywhere, and it has caching model. So we have basically everything we need in this combination. Also, we can extend JSON to be JSON linked data or Hydra or Swagger format. We will see a little bit later about that. And we have quite high quality tools for developing this kind of application. If we are talking about linked data, the idea behind this is like it's called hypermedia is the engine application state. So basically the idea is that you don't know, or your machine doesn't know anything about application, but once when you go to the endpoint, you will get some information even without documentation. I will show you on the next slide. I hope you can read this. So basically when we go to this first endpoint up, we will get the list of the relations, the list of the links. And we know that we can call that links, we can move forward through our application, and that we can do some other actions. We don't need any kind of documentation or any prior knowledge about this app, and we can still use it. That's the idea behind generic applications or machine applications. So they can move around and use our application without any prior knowledge. JSON LD is something that we will use today a lot. So basically, it's a standard recommendation since 2014. It's machine-readable data. It's quite easy to use. It allows us to have linked data, and it's already used by Google, Bing, Microsoft, and things like that. It's also quite good for the CEO. Regarding the Hydra extends also the JSON LD and give us write support, auto-discoverable APIs, and standards for connection, pagination errors, and filters. How it look like? It's like this. So basically, in any JSON LD or Hydra response, we have context, we have some ID. ID is always the full URL, it's IRI, so it's not just /ID, it's always full resource URL. And we have some other information like ID, description, author, title, and publication date. If we got some error, we also have context for that, defined as a standard, that we got the error messages. So this is 404, not found. And last one example is if we have collection, we will get also the context, we will get the list of all items, actually resources inside our connection. And at the end, we will have how many total items we have, what's our URL for next, previous page, or for the first and the last. Okay, few words about API platform. So basically, API platform is built on top of Symfony, and it's amazing framework for building the APIs. This is the list of the features what you get out of the box if you are using API platform. So basically, it has built-in like CRUD operations, pagination, filters, extensions, filtering, sorting. It's designed for speed and caching. It's also 100% open source. And the most important thing, I will say, it follows all the standards that REST API should have. And also it's built for testing with Behat, PHP, Postman, or whatever you want to use. So the promise behind the API platform is that you get fully supported PHP framework. You have support for CORS and HTTP caching. It's quite easy to build any authentication management with JSON Web Token or OAuth. It's also it will auto-generate the documentation for you, and it's quite easy to write the tests for it. It's built on top of Symfony framework, so you can use any existing Symfony bundle with this. You can even build this inside your existing application. It can be used for, it's integrated with Doctrine, and you can follow any Symfony best practices that you are using inside your team. This is the list of the features. This is the list of the feature locked with version 2.1. We will see at the end what will come in version 2.2. So starting with CRUD operations, filters, serialization groups, validation, pagination, event system, and etc. etc. Today we will probably. Okay, this was the short introduction, the 15 minutes, and we will start with the coding session. We have 8 tasks prepared for you. Every task will start with explanation, and then you will do some coding. You will have 5 to 10 minutes for every task, usually 10 minutes. After 5 minutes, we will show how to resolve the things on the screens. If you have any question, just raise your hand. I will try to help you. Paula will guide you through the development things. Also, Daniela is here from our team, so she will help us if anyone has any problem with the tasks. Task starts from the basics, so from the CRUD, and then go to the more advanced things. That's all. If you have any questions at any time, just raise your hand. We will try to answer you.
Okay, hi everyone. So, can you hear me well? Okay. Before we start, please open PHP Storm and open the project. It's called PHP API. So today we will make an API for ping-pong scorekeeping. We will have some player and a match with some score results. You have all the tasks inside the tasks folder in the root directory of the project. So there you will find all the info needed for resolving the tasks. Each time you don't catch up with the flow, you can just go with git checkout and check out to the next task, so you can keep up. So first task, before we start the first task, we need to make sure you have all the latest version of code. So please execute git fetch all and git pull, and after that update your database schema. Okay. First task we will do, we'll make CRUD API endpoints for the player entity. How it is done in the API platform. So, okay, we can move. So we were on the CRUD operations. So in the API platform, it's really easy to make some basic CRUD. You just need to have some entity, and then you need to define it as a resource. In resources config API resources/resources YAML. This is the folder that API platform reads our resources from. You can also use XML or annotations, but today we will be using YAML. So if you define this entity as a resource, the results should be this. So you get the CRUD operations with pagination and with documentation. API by default uses Swagger documentation, but we choose to use NMU documentation instead because Swagger documentation is limited only to the resources. So if you have some custom operations and endpoints in your API, it won't be shown here. So in the NMU documentation, you can add some annotation over the operation, so it will be shown here. For example, login, that's not really a resource. You cannot define it as a resource, and you can just use an NMU annotation to display it here, so that the users can try. Here you have also the sandbox, so you can try all the endpoints right here. You don't have to have anything else. We will show you that later. Other thing that we will use in our first task is schema.org. That's a vocabulary with the predefined data types. So it is a standard so that web robots could read your data. For example, if you have some JSON data that you return in your API or anywhere else on the web, for the computers and the web, it's just some strings. But if you added some type from schema.org, it will know exactly what your data is all about. So here are some examples how the Google uses it. So you must have seen when you Google something that you have this stars as rating. So that works if you put in your code, this code here, so link to the review. Google knows it's some review, and it will show it here. It will show how many stars, how many ratings, and so on. Another example, if you Google for some event that has some JSON LD with schema.org inside it, it will show here. So the 3 upcoming events, and this here big box with all the events that are going to happen. Another example, when you book a flight, if a flight company sends you email with a script with JSON LD and schema, the Google will know it's some flight and when it is starting and what the airport is, and will show you this box on top of your email. The good thing here is that you don't have to have a script inside your mail, but you can have a link on your script. So if you, for example, update your departure time, it will be changed here on the real time. So if users reopens the mail, and he can see real-time data, not the old data. So here's the code behind this example for flights. So you need to inject this code in your email. You should define the context. It's schema.org. Type is flight reservation. So now Google knows that it's some kind of flight, and it will extract data. Here you have what is the reservation for, departure, airport time, departure time, arrival, airport, and so on. And how do we use it in schema.org? It's pretty easy. So let's say we have some entity, flight reservation in our application. We just add ERI and set a link to the schema.org. And the API platform will automatically insert this context to your response on the web API. But maybe you don't want to use the same names of the schema.org. If you define this entity as a flight reservation, it will search for the same name in your properties as it's defined on the schema.org. But for example, you don't want to have your variable called reservation status, so you can just put here status and link it to the reservation status, and it will read. And now it will know that that variable is actually reservation status. Okay, so now it's your turn to try it. So we have a task 1. You should create a CRUD API endpoint for a player entity. You already have here player entity defined, so you just need to define it as a resource. But before that, you can import fixtures, so you have some test data to work on. You need to create resources YAML file in this folder. You need to add the player entity resource, and then open this link to test what you got. For the extra credit, you should use a schema.org person to mark a player as a person. If you prefer to use XML annotations, you can also use that. But the solution will be in the YAML, and you can start.
Regarding the slides, I share it on a Twitter under the WebSC, so you can download it. Just regarding the CRUD operation, Paula showed you here the entire process. Paula already did for you, created the model. So you will start usually with creating the model. Then this part of the code is exposing your model to the API platform. And after you do that, you will get full CRUD with support, relation for end dates, data validation, collection support, error serialization, automatic routes registration. So basically, with few lines of the code, you will expose your model to the API, and you will get all the routes and everything you need for that model, including validation, sorting, hypermedia endpoint, and things like that, just in few lines of the code. You will see at the end of the first task. That is the goal of this task.
Okay, so what you need to do is create a file resources YAML. And then you need to add the player entity here, so resources. And that's it. Now we can open our documentation.
Just small notes. in documentation, they are using annotation. We will use YAML files here. We prefer to use YAML because from our perspective, in our projects, when we get a lot of actions on one resource, it's much easier to read YAML file than to read annotation. But for group serialization later, we will use annotation. So we are mixing with that a little bit. But if you have questions with transferring it from documentation to YAML, just ask.
Okay, so we now have the CRUD actions with just 2 lines of code. Here we have what fields will we get when we call this endpoint, and we have a sandbox. We can go try, and we got 0 because I didn't import my fixtures. Okay, now I'll try again. And here we have all the users from our database. Here you can see the format. API platform supports XML, HTML, JSON, JSON-LD formats, but we set that JSON-LD is the default one, and so we don't need to send this argument. It will automatically use the JSON-LD. We also here have a post, a delete, get single player. We can try to call that, but we need an ID. Here we can see we have a context, that is a player. We have ID, that's a full link. That's what Antonio was talking about earlier. We have that type is a player, and all the fields from the player entity. And now we will add schema.org. We will use the person entity. Okay, now we marked our player as a person. Now if we try that again, we can open the context and see it. No, we don't have to. We here have now type schema.org person, and before we had only person, which was the name of our entity. But if we go here, it won't load because internet is too slow. We have fields first name and the last name, but in the schema.org person, first name is actually given name, and the last name is a family name. So we need to add those fields here so that others can recognize those fields. So we add properties, first name, so first name is a given name, and last name is a family name. Okay, so we can see that nothing changed in this response, but if we open this link here with the context inside, so here we have a first name with a link on schema.org and the last name.
Paula, okay, we can go step back. I'll try to explain what's happening. So basically, you need to put it in the proper folder. So it's under the bundle resources, config API resources, resources YAML file. That's convention, needs to be there. Then you need to define your resources. If you do resources, app bundle entity player, tilde, you will get full default configuration. You will get entire CRUD with everything, but nothing will be configured. So that's the default configuration. Now we will start customizing the thing. We will start with this everything, and then we will later add some custom operations and things like that. If we go too fast, please raise hand, tell us to slow down. Okay? Is it clear now?
What's clear is just a faster type along.
Okay, but don't worry too much about typing. We have everything this in the tasks. So once when we check out the tasks too, you will be there with entire code ready.
Yes, it's better to listen and see the code than type it because you have already that typed on the GitHub.
If you can follow typing, it's also okay.
Okay. Now you may have noticed we have a lot of fields that should not be here. For example, we have plain password, confirmation token. These are all fields of the player entity because we extended the FOSS user bundle entity. But we maybe want just show and get first name, last name, email, and that's it. We don't want to show these fields. Also, when we post a new player, we don't want to expose all these fields. We just want to expose some basic fields like username, email, password, first name, last name, and that's it. Roles are going automatically, enabled, super admin, that all should go automatically. So how do we do that? We do that by adding some serialization groups. What are serialization groups? API platform uses, just a second. API platform uses Symfony serialization groups. So it allows you to choose which fields you want to return in your response with serialization context, and which fields do you want to expose when adding and putting some object with the serialization context. Denormalization is a write process and normalization is a read process. You can use XML YAML annotations to define those groups. So how does that work? So we have one object that is loaded from the database, and now we need to show it to the user. So first of all, we need to normalize it to some array. When normalizing, API platform will see which groups you defined for the serialization, and then just normalize those fields. And then you will get to array, and just encode it in the whichever formats you want. In our case, it will be JSON LD. So that is a serialization process. And the other process is when a user posts something, and then you get those data, you want to save it to the database. So you will get the JSON data, you need to decode it to an array, and then with the normalization context, you will turn it to objects and then work on that object, save to database or whatever you need to do, and that is the serialization context. So serialization is for reading data, and deserialization is for writing data. So how does that work in code? See, like this, you need to use the groups, the Symfony groups, and then you add it to annotation. So you just define, for example, that you want player read and player write group on these 4 fields. And then in the resources file, you just add normalization context will read all the fields that you marked with player read, and the normalization context, which is writing, will read all fields that you marked with player write. In this case, we have all the same fields here, but we can, for example, remove player read from the email, and then when you call get me player, you will get just these 3 fields. You won't get email, but when you go to post a new player, you will need to write all those 4 fields. ID is by default always included in the normalization context. So now if you do this, all the other fields won't be shown and won't be available for writing. We can also use different serialization groups per operations. So what is an operation? Operation is like a combination of the root, method, and controller. So API platform by default has built-in operations. For example, in the first task, when you just mark tilde, it by default generated all the operations, just get single item, put, delete, and get collection, and post single item. So if you want to modify it, you should define like this, item operations, and then you have these 3. We want to, in this example, we want to add some other group for getting a single player, and then we need to add him group like this. So for all the other methods, API platform will read these groups, and for the single operation, it will read this. If you, for example, define here item operations and you don't include put and delete, you will overwrite the default behavior and you will just expose get operation, and put and delete won't be here anymore. So if we don't want to disable them, so we will just put here. It's the same thing for the collection operations. You can also define whatever you want to normalization in the normalization context.
Okay, so can you just turn back? So we have 3 levels here. Like we show you the default one with tilde. Then we have the attributes level. That's the top level for our entire entity. But we can go down to the item operation. We also have collection operation for get everything, for example. And we can define. It's possible to define also the custom routes. You will see later, not just the get, put, and delete. By default, we have 3 of them always out of the box. But as Paula told you, we can remove some of them or we can customize some of it. Just before you go to the task 1, we didn't put it on a slide, but please do git check out task 2.
If you have any changes, you can go with git revert or git stash and then git check out task 2. So we are on the same track.
In git task 2.
Task 1, sorry.
Git task 1.
Git check out task 1.
Can you hear me now with this? Okay. Yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's not mistake, it's on the same level. So item operations are on same level in ending as
properties.
As
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So the task 2. Just the question, is everything clear with this denormalization, normalization things? You understand all? Yeah.
What's the reason for prefixing everything with player on?
Because if you say, I don't know, if you call that group 1, group 2, later when you are mixing a lot, for example, if you have 3 resources connected, you need to know which group is denormalized and which is normalized. So in this way, you know which groups you are using for writing, which groups you are using for reading. It's just because of the easier reading the code.
Okay, for the task 2, we want to use these groups we just shown. So what we need to do is expose only following fields for the CRUD operations, same one for the write and same for the reading, first name, last name, email, and username. So what we need to do, we need to add normalization and then normalization groups in the resources YAML, and then add those groups to the player entity fields. For the extra credit, you will use a different group for different operations. So when getting a single player item, it's an item operation, you need to add some extra fields like last login and roles. So you will define a new group which will only be connected to the get single player, and that new group name you will add on these fields. You can notice you don't have these fields here, but they are here in the base user. And you can just override the field. You can go here and set protected roles and then just give him annotation with the group. And also for the extra credit, you try to disable delete action for player. So you will, when you're defining item operations, just don't add delete action and just get and put, and you will get it. I will open you the slide with the syntax so you can look at it.
Again, if someone needs help.
Ja sam ga testirao out of the box, radile nekada, to je bila ima promis.
How to find what is new properties.
This is a good question. The question was how to find which IRA thing to use. So you can probably show the schema or a GUT to show what we are using. It's a standard, so we will show that.
Nisam skužila šta.
Kako ova ili, kako znat koji korist? Pokaži na schema or a GUT. To nismo pokazali.
So for the IRI, you can go here. Internet is a bit slow, I don't know if we could open it, but here on this page you have a list of all available objects, here in schemas, and then you just find the one you want and define. For example, if you have an event, search for event and use the fields you can use, or you have some person, you mark it as a person. If you have some product, you can find the product and use the fields you like. So just search for the data, it's basically all there. But in this task, you don't have to use the schema or GUT, it was just for the first task. Yes. Yes, of course. You can define them in XML or in the YAML, but we will use annotations today. You can open the Symfony documentation, Serialization Groups, and there you can find the syntax on how to use it. Yes, the API platform will read it if you do it any of those ways.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, I know it's a bit mixed up, but we find that the easiest way, so we have in the YAML, it's really easy to read, and when we open entity, we know which groups are there, we don't have to open another file, so it's just what you like the best. Yes.
It usually depends from the team to team. After a few projects, we find out that this fits best for us. So you can use annotations for anything, or you can use anything as a YAML, but this mixture is like, we find out that is the easiest way for us. Also, Paula already told you, but just to repeat, if you don't define the groups per operation, so for example, we don't have put and delete, we didn't define any groups, these default ones will be used, so player read and player write. For put, it will be player write. For delete, we don't need any groups, we just delete the resource. Does anyone needs help? Questions? Okay. I will
show you the solution. So we need to expose first name, last name, email, and username. We will add some groups here. So we will use the Symfony groups. Not here. I think Okay, so we will add on these fields player write and player read. We'll add it to the last name, email, and username. We need to override email in the username. Okay, now we need to add that to the resources. So we'll add attributes. Then normalization groups. I'm not sure of the syntax. Normalization context, sorry. then groups. So here, this is for normalization is for reading data, so we will let it player read. And now we need to add denormalization context. It will be player write. Now we will see what happened here. Okay, now you see that we only enable these 4 fields for post, for get to, get single, all the same. We can even try it. Okay, so we have the fields we wanted. Now we want to define, we want to display some extra fields for get single player. This is this endpoint. So I'm getting 1 player. Now we have these 4 fields, but we want to also add roles and the last login. So we will first add the new group. Last login. And routes. Roles. Route, yes.
You need to rewrite the attributes when you want to put the group, so it's not extended with your class. So this is the reason why we are rewriting the protected properties here in a model.
Okay, so now we added player extra group to last login and roles. And here we need now define item operations. Now we will have get method. This is for the get single player. Now normalization context. So here we want to show all the player read fields and some extra. So we'll add 2 groups. Player read and player extra. So if we go back to the player, so what will be shown? Will be shown this, 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 and the player extra, these 2 fields. Okay, now we see we added last login and the roles. And if we go here to the get collection, we still have only these 4 fields. And now, if we refresh our page, we see we lost our put and delete operation. It's because we didn't define it and we override our item operations. So for the extra credit was to disable delete operation, so we will only add the put operation. Here. And now if we refresh, we have the put operation. So I think that was it for this task. I will leave you open so you can...
As you can notice, the main idea behind the API framework, platform, whatever you want, is that these basic things like CRUD operations, validations, things are just matter of configuration. You don't need to write actually any kind of complex code like routing or controllers or events or anything like that. Of course, there is a lot of coding when you are doing complex APIs, but usually for these simple things, it's just matter of configuration. As Symfony developers, we are all lazy, so we are usually configuring the things, so that's it. Any questions about this task? Okay, we all can do git checkout too, yes? Can you just repeat the question a little louder, please?
Is it possible to specify with a get parent which group I can get?
In a parent of a player?
Yeah.
No, it's not. If you, yeah, if you, sorry, like how in operation?
Now we specify
We-
operations
okay.
groups we get.
Yeah,
Is it possible to control this via get parent or something?
like changing dynamically the groups.
Yes, it's possible.
That is possible, but we will mention that a little bit later. That's like
Yes,
the new thing in the API platform.
yes, API platform supports to give dynamic normalization context. In the new version, it also supports a parameter where the client can send, give me that operation group, and it will return that operation group. But it also, you can specify which fields you want to return, so it's pretty flexible. It's not yet in this version, but in the next version, where beta, it will be available. We will show you at the end of the workshop the new features, and the features we didn't have time to show because there are many of them, so we cannot try them everything. Just the basics one will. Okay, so we can call git stash and git checkout task 2 to be on the same track.
Okay, I think we are perfect with the time for complete this task before the coffee break. So the next task is implementing the authentication using JSON Web Token. This is maybe one of the most interesting things because we will see how to integrate other Symfony bundles inside API platform and how to use JSON Web Token. Sorry, it's a problem with mic, but I'll try to speak louder. Okay, and how to use JSON Web Token as authentication tool for our application. So basically, are you all familiar with JSON Web Tokens? Yeah, so I was at the workshop before ours, so they spoke about that. It's an industry standard, it's a lightweight, it's used for authentication of our user in the API. Its token is stored on a client side in local storage usually. It's stateless and doesn't have any session related to that. It works like this. You saw the similar slide in workshop before. So we post to some root our username and a password. If it is correct, we get the JSON Web Token with a secret. We send it back to the client, and clients send it with every request where authentication is needed in our application, and we return response if JSON Web Token is valid. It looks like this. It's from 3 parts, so header, payload, and verify the signature. The header describes our JSON Web Token, which algorithm is used, which type of the token is used, and payload give us some information, usually the username, email, or something like that about our user. And the verify signature just verifies is everything correct with our JSON Web Token. Does any data is corrupt or similar things. So basically how we integrate this. There is always bundle for that. So we will use these 2 bundles. It provides us authentication bundle, and this JWT refresh and token bundle give us possibility to have refresh token feature. Sorry. You all know. Okay, next slide. So basically, in documentation, the only difference between every endpoint in your API application is that we are not sending JSON as a body format. We are sending the form data. The reason is because the API platform uses Symfony security component, so we need to send in this format username and the password. So we set the format up, and we put the username and the password, and if everything is correct, we will get respond like this. So we will get the token, and we will get the refresh token. Token has some expire date, so it works, for example, for a day. And after that, we can use refresh token to generate new token. So we have the endpoint for that. We just send refresh token. We will get the new token that is valid. And we can use that token for authentication of our user. Of course, in this way, we don't need to ask to enter username and a password or store that, if you are crazy, for example, to client side, and we can use just the secret refresh token to do that. So basically, you will see in this in this task, I think the best way is to start working immediately and describe what we are doing. We have a lot of things to do, so we need to define our private and public certificates for JSON Web Token. We need to define firewall. We need to define the rules for our users, and after that we will be able to log in our user. So I think the best way is to, Paula, start working. I will go around and help you. Everything is again prepared. We have everything. We don't need to do any composer install and things like that, so we can start working immediately. Again, if someone needs help, just please raise your hand.
Okay, so as Antonio mentioned, we will use this bundle. It has a lot of configuration, you can see it here. If we go into details, it would take very long. It is workshop for itself. So we will just follow this documentation and implement a login. You have all this on the bundle documentation site, and you just follow it, and you have in a few minutes prepared a login. So, first of all, we need to enable this bundle in our app kernel. This one. It's already installed in vendor, so you don't have to call composer install. Okay, now that we enabled it, next step, we need to generate SSH keys so that authentication can work. So we need to make this directory. We open our console and make this directory. Next thing, we need to generate the key. So when generating the key, it will ask you for some password. You need to remember which password you entered, because we will add it later to the parameters. So we generate the SSH key. So now we need to add some password. I will add ping pong. And again. And now we generated our first key. So we need to generate the next key using the same password. Ping pong. And that's it. Now we will need to add some config. We can just copy this and add it to the app config YAML. Like this. So here you can see we are using some parameters, so we will need to add them to the parameters YAML. We have that prepared too.
This time to live is time how much time your token will be alive. After that, your token expires, so you need to use refresh token to create new one or login user again.
Yes. Okay, now we will add this to the parameters YAML. Task. We go to the parameters YAML and add those fields. Okay, now this is the path to the tokens we just generated. Here we need to enter that password we just used. In my case, is this one. And this is the JSON Web Token time to live. In production, it's very good to use a small time to live, so for the security reasons, so that the tokens are generated more frequently. But when using your locally, we just put a little bit more time, so we don't have to log in each time again.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Does the TTL refreshes after every request?
No.
No, when this expires, you need to call the refresh token you got, and then it's a new token is generated. So this old one, it doesn't work after this time is passed. That's why you have a refresh token, so you don't have to go again and enter your username and password. Then you can use refresh token. You can also set time to live for the refresh token.
Yeah.
For example, you set it, to, for example, 3 weeks, and after 3 weeks, user will have to log in again. Or you can put it to I don't know, 1 year, depends on what you want.
So 1 hour, 3 weeks from time that the token is first time generated. It doesn't extend the time. Any other questions?
Okay, if we are going too fast, just raise your hand and we will slow down. Okay, now we need to add some firewalls. We will copy these 2 firewalls and add it to the security YAML, also in the app config folder. Put it just on the top of the main. Okay, like this. So here we have some routes that will go to the login. It needs to be stateless. On this checked path, the client will send his login. You can here define how the username and password parameters will look like. And here you can see there are success and failure handlers. So these handlers will override the default handlers of the first user bundle that we are using, and will process the login itself and return the token instead of the session that it usually does. And here we have the API platform, the API firewall, sorry. So now we will need to add some access control. We will log some routes so we can check if we are logged in okay. Okay, this is extra route. So we need to open the login route so the users can log in, and we will just log the /players route. So if you want to get player, post player, you need to be logged in. Next step, we will need to add the route for the login. This usually is not really required. It's generated by itself, but we will add this controller only because we could give him the annotations for the documentation, because we want to show our login route in the sandbox so that clients that use the API could easily try it. They don't have to go to some other system for testing it. Okay, so we go to the routing YAML. And change this route.
We also got the question why we are not using Swagger documentation. This is one of the reasons, because we cannot modify the...
Yes, and also if you are building a big API, you will have some custom routes that are separated for the API platform, and you won't be able to show them in the documentation because you didn't define them as a resource. So this is a good way to display all the available routes in your documentation. Okay, so here we can see we added to the login route, we added some controller and the method post. So now we need to make this controller. So we create a new folder, controller. And then we will make authentication controller inside it. Now we will go to our task. Okay, first of all, we'll extend controller. The Symfony default one. And we need to use API doc from the Netgen documentation bundle, like this. so we could add some annotation for our documentation. Now we'll just copy the control so you don't have to type it by yourself. Okay, so we made this section, but this section won't be called because it's handled by the firewall. Firewall will catch it before it reaches this our method and does the stuff he needs to do and authenticate the user. But this way we get to expose this in our documentation. So you just need to define the API doc. This is the description that will be provided for your endpoint. You add some description in which section in the documentation will go. These are status codes that will be returned when you try the API. You can add some description here. And these are parameters that will be available for clients to post when adding some data. So when you go to login, we will have username and password with the form data type. It will be all required, marked as required, and here we will have description username and the plain password. Okay, so now we should have implemented our login. This is some user from the data fixtures we imported to our database we can use for the login. Okay, now we have this new section and this new route. We can see here that Sandbox has a username and password and these codes that we entered there in annotations, and it also has these description that we put here. Okay, now the important thing, we need to switch to form data because Symfony firewall won't use the JSON format, only the form data for the security. So we will enter test at pingpong.dev and password is password and try. And now we got our token.
You can see that a refresh token is missing here. That's the next thing that we will implement. But just if someone wasn't able to follow this, you can always git checkout task free and check the login by yourself. But you will have access token inside it.
Yeah, we have some more things to do before we are done. We will add a refresh token. Okay, now.
Any questions, maybe?
We will copy this token.
Okay.
No questions. And enter it here. And click Save. If you don't click Save, it won't recognize it. So now that we added this token, in here, this documentation, we automatically add it to each header that you try your endpoints here. So you're now automatically logged in for all of these endpoints. So now we will switch back to JSON, and we will see if we can get a player. If we get a player, that means we are logged in successfully. If we don't get him, it means we failed to log in. Okay, so we got our player. And if I clear my token, and I try it again, okay, I need to clear my cache. Okay, something went wrong. Okay, I know what went wrong. We misconfigured this. This needs to go to end. Because Symfony access control reads from the top to the bottom, so if we put this, it will be unlocked for all routes, so all the locked routes need to go on the top. And just a clear cache. Okay, so now we got an error that JSON Web Token is not found and that we are unauthorized to use this endpoint. Now we need to log in again. Put the form data. Switch back to JSON, and now we should be logged in again, and it's working. So do you have any questions for this part? Okay, now we can move to the refresh token. So for the refresh token, we have another bundle that is connected to this one. We need to enable it in the app kernel. Just uncomment this line and it will be enabled. So we also need to create some route in the routing YAML. Like this. And here we need to create some controller that will handle this method for refreshing token. And then we will create this method in this controller. So we have it prepared here, so we can just copy and put it to authentication controller here. And you need to use this request of the Symfony because we are using it here. So now you can see we also added some documentation here, the same way that we did it here with the login. This time we have a parameter refresh token. It also needs to be form data. And now we just called this service and refresh our token, and it will return the new response with the access token and the refresh token. We also need to define a new firewall for this in a security YAML. Here.
Just small notice, if you check out the task 3, you need to update schema and generate fixtures again, and you need to still generate the public and private keys.
Yes,
So-
but that we will come to that after we are done
Okay,
with this
sorry.
task. Okay, so we added this refresh firewall. Now we need to open the route for refreshing token, because you don't have to be logged in if you want to refresh the token. We add it to the security, to the access control. Here. Make sure you add it somewhere on top of this one last route, anywhere is okay. Now the configuration. We need to add some small config here in the config YAML. Okay, so here we defined which firewall we want to use. We will use the API, and this is the time to live for refresh token. This is the default value. You can see it's a bit bigger than default value of the access token because you want your user to be logged in a bit more time than, I don't know, a few minutes. And now we need to update our database because refresh token will be saved to the database. Okay, I think we did all. Now, if we try to log in, oops. You see, if I try to log in into JSON, it just throws an exception because it only accepts form data. We will clear the token because we don't need it for login. And now, in our response, we have a refresh token along with the token. So if, for example, our token has expired, it doesn't have to be expired, we can refresh it anyway. We will use this refresh token. Okay, I need to clear cache because we don't have the root here in documentation. Cache clear. Okay, now we have the root. We had the refresh token. We put form data and then try. And now we have a new token, a new refresh token. We can try to log in now with this token.
Just don't forget to use form data also for refresh token.
Yes, form data. So only for login and token refresh form data. Here we save the new access token. And we try to get players to see if it's working. So we are logged in again.
Any questions?
Okay, we can also see the header. If we go to network and we try this. You can see in our request headers we have authorization, and here we have our token injected, because without that token we would not be logged in. So the client on the front-end app, on each request, needs to send this token. Okay.
Okay, we have a coffee break in 2 minutes, so just this, can you all please git check out task 3?
Okay, so when you check out to the task 3, remember to put your parameters here, because you know that parameters don't go to the GitHub, so you need to add them. If you didn't already put them in, you call the git stash, git check out task 3, and then enter these parameters here.
And you will need to generate private and the public keys.
Yes, and you need to generate keys. Yes, that's true. Also, if you didn't do this step here, you need to do that too, because the SSH keys also don't go to the GitHub, so you need to have your own.
We will use authentication system later, so you should complete all this task.
If you need help with this, just raise your hand.
Yeah. Just small recap before the coffee break. So what we learned, it's creating the CRUD operations, locking the roots, so basically implementing the authentication system, some customization of CRUD system, and how we can create, delete, put, or read the data from the API. The most important thing, if you can notice, we didn't use Symfony forms at any time. So there is any Symfony form building for building the data or creating data or anything like that. So that saves a lot of time, I think.
Yes, and after the break, we will make some event listener, Doctrine extensions, and add some filters. And in those tasks, you will see how it actually all works behind the scenes. So right now, you all know that you need to just define it here, but you don't know how it is really done. So when going in the more customization, you get a bigger picture on how it really works and how it is generated.
Any questions?
So that's it. See you after the break.
Okay, did you all complete the task 3? So we can move to task 4. Does anyone need help maybe? Okay.
Okay, we'll get dash our changes just to have the same code. Okay, check out task 3. And please don't forget, if you didn't already, generate SSH keys and these two parameters YAML. So you have all here in the beginning of the task 3, so you can do it if you didn't. Okay. Now, if we try to go and post new player, we didn't enter any data, and we of course got an error. It's a 400 word request, and here we can see it's a context constraint validation list. It's an error, and we have a description with all the errors and violation list for each field. So we have property path to know which field is this about, and message. So this format is really good for the front end. So they can just write one service which will read which fields have an error, and for example mark them as red or add some CSS, and write this message that is related to this field. But if we try to enter some data, now we can see we got some error with the database. This is because we don't have here the password, and we can't write to the database without password. So now in this new task, we want to create some event listener that will generate the password after client enters a new player, and after it writes it to the database, it will send an welcome email with new user's password. Okay. So API platform has some built-in events. So how do they work? So API platform has some base controller that is handling all the operations. So for example, when we are adding a new object, the controller will read that new object, it will validate it, and it will serialize it and write to the database and return some response. So in that process, it dispatches some events on which we can hook. So if we, for example, hook on the post validate, and enter some our data, it's the same as we took that data and put it in that controller, and now in that flow we have our own code. So here's the list of all events you can hook up on to. The most usual ones are post validate, or post write, or pre-respond. Okay. Here is an example for the match. Just a second, I think we skipped something. No. This is just a second. Yes, that's okay. Now, so if a user wants to enter a new match, we, for example, want to write a winner to the database. So if a user posts, I don't know, player 1, player 2, and points, he doesn't need to enter the winner because we can calculate it ourselves. So we will make some event subscriber that will calculate who won and save it to the database. So how do we do that? We need to implement event subscriber interface, and then we need to implement this getSubscribedEvent method, which will tell us on which event we want to hook to. In this example, we will use post-validate. So after user enters some match, the data is okay. We want to add some new field. So on this event, we will call this method here. Event subscriber will inject in each method this getResponse for controller result event object. From that object, we can get the current object, and we can get which method is. In our case, this will be post. But you need to be aware that this subscriber is called for each method and for each resource. So in the beginning, you need to check if this object is the object you want to edit. So here we check if this object is not a match or it's not a post, we just return. We don't have to do anything here. And then if that's okay, we will inject our match helper, which will calculate who won the game. There's no need to define this as a service and inject this service here, because the event subscribers are auto-wired. So it will do the job for us. It will inject this service and it will mark it as event. So now we just call this match helper get me a winner and save me a winner to this match. Now the API platform default controller will continue to work on our modified object, not the old one we got here. Okay.
So basically this allows us amazing flexibility. We don't need to override controllers in any case regarding the resources. We just need to pick proper event, do any changes on our object or resource, whatever you want to call it, and then you will get the modified response from your action. You will see that in example. And it also, Paula told you that this is auto-wired. You don't need to register the services. That's the feature from, I think, Symfony 3.3. So you can see that the API platform is following the Symfony and upgrades all the time.
Okay, so our task will be to create event subscriber for posting new players, we already told. We need to call it on posting players, and we will need to generate some password. And then after we write that new user successfully to the database, we want to send him some welcome email. So how we do that? We create event subscriber, and then in getSubscribed events, we call post player post write method for post write. So first we call the pre-write method. So before I'm writing my new player to the database, I want to add him some password, and after I'm sure the new user is created, so post write, I will send him the welcome email.
I just don't know, did you notice before, but this here, pre-write and post-writes are just priorities. Paula can show you the class, it's just numbers. It was on a slide, 2 slides before.
Well, we will show you that after we implement it. Okay, so now you need to create this event and these 2 methods. And we also prepared the user handler for you, which has the methods for generating password and method for sending email, so you don't have to worry about that. Just inject it through the constructor and use its methods to do the job for you. And for the extra info, for the extra credit, we need to log this endpoint just for the role admin. So we can do it through the Symfony firewall, but we can also do it through the configuration. So in our resources YAML, in our player, we just add another config config role. So we put access control, and we can use the access control from the Symfony security, which has all the expressions. For example, here we need to add has role admin. You can also add all the other stuff you need. This is really a simple example, but sometimes you will need some extra sorry. You will need to do some extra expressions which are more complex than that. Here in more info you have all you need to do to complete this task, and you have also documentation links for more info.
And I will just add it that this is maybe the most important thing of API platform, because most of your logic will be inside listeners. You won't override controllers or something like that, so you will hook to events, do some custom logic, and then move forward with your REST API. So usually you will have a lot of listeners, actually subscribers. You can use listeners if you want. So subscribers, and you will modify it, check the data, and do some other manipulation with the data inside this part. Paula already told you, so creating this event subscriber is the same as in any Symfony application. It's not API platform, it's Symfony thing. So you just need to create a class which implements the event subscriber interface in proper folder, actually in proper namespace, and that's basically all the thing you need to do. And inside the handler you have the service that you will inject, and it will do all the logic for you.
Okay, I will just check out to the solution and then show you. You can do it too by git checkout task 4. So what we needed to do here is create player event subscriber, inject a user handler. It will be auto-wired, and we don't have to define it as a service. And then we defined subscribed events for pre-write and post-write. So this method will be called before writing a new player to the database. We got this argument, we got our player, our method, and first of all we need to check if it's really the player object and if it's really the post method. And then we just call the user handler, generate password, and activate user. So now we modified this player object, and the API platform will continue to work with the modified object. And after that has passed, we come to the post-write. So player is already in the database, and now we want to send the email. So we did do exactly the same checks. We check if this player is a player object, and we check if method is post, and if it's all okay, we just call user handler and send registration confirmation email.
Again, just small notice, we defined this app. The user handler is defined as a service. So that's the reason why it is auto-wired and injected.
Yes, here is the service for the user handler.
But you can see that we didn't define any subscriber here. But that's the feature from the Symfony. It's not any kind of the magic.
Okay, and the second part was to lock it for the role admin. So here if we defined collection operations, we need to add post and get. If we only add post, get will be lost. And we just add here access control has role admin, as simple as that. So now we need to be admin in order to add new player. So now we will try it.
This allows us, for example, to lock entire player for user, but for example, for creating only the new Only for creating action we need to be role admin, but to access to the player's root, if we lock it on a level of Symfony firewall, we still need to be authenticated user. But in this way we can do some additional security checks for only some parts of our operations.
Okay. Now we are logged in as an ordinary user, but we got access denied, forbidden, because we just locked this root. But if we go to get players, we can get it. So we locked just this operation here for the role admin. And now we will log in as an admin to see if this is really working. I think we have admin user in the fixtures. That's task 4. We can go to fixtures to find the admin users. I didn't write it here in tasks, sorry. Okay, so we are using Alice Doctrine fixtures, and here we can see what will be in our database. It will be 30 random players, and these 2 players just to know how to log in. So the username for the admin is this admin@pingpong.dev. And the password is password. We did here form data. Again, we are logged in. If anyone still has trouble logging in, just raise your hand. We will help you. So we put here access token and we switch back to JSON.
Or if you have any questions, just ask.
Okay, now we will try to add a new player. Nope. We'll enter correct data. Try. Okay, so we got created. So this means our user is successfully created, which also means our listener is working properly, because it would throw an exception that password does not exist. And the email is sent to the user's email. I don't know if sending emails work on the virtual machines, but in production it should work. Okay. Do you have any questions for this task? Okay, we can move on.
So basically you just need to know at which point you want to hook on your resource and what do you want to do with that. So even if all the things are completed, like the resource is serialized, you still can hook and change some things.
Okay, next task would be to make match CRUD and change some pagination config and try it in the sandbox. So we already know how to make a CRUD, we know how to make serialization groups, so I won't repeat that. You will have all the info in the task. And now we will see how the pagination config works. So here is the configuration for the API platform in the config YAML. These are all possible options that you can config. You can see these 3 last are optional. So the first one, items per page. 30 is default. So when you try to get a collection, you will get on the first page, you will get 30 results. Here, if you change it, for example, to 10, first page will return 10, and the next page will return next 10 items. Client items per page, true. This is to enable a client to request how many items he wants to have in a response. This other parameter, items per page, so if he sends in his GET request items per page equals 10, he will get 10 results for that collection. But if we put this to false, he won't be able to do that, he will just get 30 and that's it. Client enabled true. This is the default value. This means that the client can disable pagination. If he sends this pagination equals false, if he tries to get collection, he'll get all the results from the database. It won't have pagination, it won't be limited. And the page parameter name, we can change it here. Its default is this one. So the client can send, for example, give me page 10, he will get results from page 10. Okay. So task 5, you need to create a CRUD for match. Match is already here in entities. You will add some serialization, deserialization groups as you like. And you will add it here to the resources YAML. So you will just go down and add app bundle entity match and all the same stuff that we already did for the player. And then you will go to the config and try to change the items per page and this parameter name and try it in sandbox to check if it changed. Also, what you need to do is to try to create a new match. When creating new match, you will need to enter the IRI for the player. So here, make sure when you're sending player 1 and player 2, you need to send the full link. So you don't send, if, for example, I want to add the player with ID 5, I won't send 5, I will send /API/version1/players/5. So full link, because that's the standard we are following here. And any more info you can find here in documentation, or you can ask us.
So in Hydra and JSON LD, we are always using IRI for defining some resource, not just the ID of the user, but entire IRI, because its definition, it's our resource.
Yeah, so you're sending full ID. You can see here when you try to get players, this ID has a full link. Here we have app dev PHP because we are on a dev environment, but we don't need to send that. We can send just this part, and we can send it all for the dev environment.
And if you remember from the slides when we mentioned that some generic clients or machines can read this, if we just provide them with the ID, they don't know how to go to that resource. If you provide entire IRI, they know they need to go to that endpoint, and they will get info about that resource. In this case, for example, the player. Okay, you can try this by yourself. It's the same as a task 1. So try it for a few minutes, then we will check out and see what we added to the code. So basically, it's just in resources YAML file you need to add. You need to expose your model as a player. Model of a match, of course.
Match.
Yeah, but in the same way as a player,
Yes.
I wanted to tell that.
Okay, what I forgot to mention, in your get matches response, you also need to add player's first and last name. So if you define the normalization group for matches, for example, as matches read, you just go here to player and go to first name, just add matches read, matches read. So it will automatically, inside of the match object, show user player ID, player first name, and player last name. It can be useful if you on front end want to, for example, list all the users for a match, and you don't want to go 10 times to get user endpoint just to get first and last name. You can just get it directly from the match object. Okay, so I'm going to show you the results. Check out task 5 to get the results. So what we did here, we needed to create a CRUD for match. So we added some groups. We used the Symfony groups. Here for match read for normalization and match write for the normalization context. We added fields which we wanted to show. And then we define it as a resource. So collection operation and item operation. And here are the attributes for normalization context and the normalization context. And these are groups that we added to there. So here we can see that we enabled all collection operations. Actually, we could just have delete this because this is the default value. And for the item operations, we only enable to get. So we don't have a put, we don't have a delete. Okay. That's task 5. Then we needed to change some pagination configuration. So we go here. So we change items per page. We can put, for example, 5. And then if we go here, now we have this match in sandbox. Try. Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it. So here you can see the API platform automatically added total items, and here we have Hydra tags for the pagination. So here we have, which is the current page. We have a type, it's not a collection view, but it's partial collection view because we are viewing only 5 of 100. And here you can see the first page, the last page, the next page. Those are all links. So in the front-end application, you can just follow these links. So I want to go to page 2, you just enter this link, you are on a page 2. And also, we needed to add first name and last name to the match response. So we added match read here to these 2 fields.
Just notice this is player entity.
Yes, this is player entity.
So we put the groups from the definition of match.
So here we have player 1. We have ID, that's the default. We have a type, it's a person. We added that on the task 1. And first name and last name. And we have also that for the player 2. Now you can see this ID is a link. It's not a number. So what is a good thing? We can just go, if we can create a link on the front end and just click on it, and we are going to the players, to the player entity. So we don't have to build the link for ourselves. We already have it here. So we are just using the API through the links.
Yeah, and any machine or Google crawler can do the same, and it knows it's a person. And for example, some of you did that, defined the type of this thing as a sport event from schema or org. So you can do that thing. And then your data is understandable for the machines also. So it knows it's a sports event, some kind of sport event, and then can read, okay, I have some persons, and then can show you data in some cool way.
The other part of task was to try to add some match. So player 1 points, for example, 4, 2. So player 1, we will find some players here. For example, we will use this player. For the player 1, you see here you have a ERI value. So you know that you need to enter the full ERI, not just the ID. And some another player. And try. Bad request. Not well. Okay, because you see here, I got some error. This is not a valid choice. That is because I added some validation here. You see, I put a choice that only these values can go for player 1 points and player 2 points, and I entered the number 4. So that is not supported. So you can see, you can just use the Symfony built-in validation, and it will handle all the errors for you.
Yeah, we forgot to show you this part with validation when we did the CRUDs, but you did it in the same way as when you are doing the, let's call it regular Symfony read-write.
Okay, so now we will fix it. We'll step 3. This should go. Okay, now we created a new match, and here we have the player we entered with the first name and last name, player 2, and here we have the winner. Okay.
Questions? Can you please use the mic?
How can you achieve that the first name and the last name doesn't display in the list of the matches, but on the item operation of single match.
Okay, you would need to go here to the resources. You will need to define, oops, sorry, that's already here. Here you have item operation. You would just use normalization context.
Basically, I explained you that at the first CRUD. So this is the let's call it default for all operations. But on every single operation, for item or collection operation, you can define different groups. And you can manipulate the data which you will output with that. We have that in the example above, if you can just scroll up.
Okay, I will show it.
Yeah, you can show
It's
it.
okay to repeat some stuff, you will know it better. So,
Yeah.
for example, for this item operation, we want match read. That's the same for all. And we want some extra fields, user first name and last name of player. So we'll call it, for example, match extra. And now we need to add this group to the player. So now only this operation has these fields that will be shown. This one will only have the fields that we marked as match read. So we can try it to see. If you go to all matches, you see we now have only link to player 1, player 2. We don't have first name and last name. But if we go to a single match, we have that.
And usually you will have a lot of this kind of situation in your APIs, yes? Can you use the mic, please?
How would you expose fields based on roles? So, for example, an admin can see an email and your normal user cannot see an email.
That's dynamic roles. You need to use dynamic roles. Here, you need to in player entity, you need to add some extra method. I'm not sure how it goes, but it's an extra feature that we will show after the workshop. It will be just a short to display it. So you can also open documentation if you want to see it now. It's called dynamic normalization groups, I think. And there you can, based on the user or on any field value, you can show this group or that group.
Also, you can manipulate that with events because you have user in events, so you can do that. But this is the best way, but it's a new feature. Or you can create 2 routes and then lock one for admin and set the different kind of the groups.
Yes, you can also create...
Sorry? No need for that.
Maybe you can do this. You can create another get operation.
Yeah.
Get for admin.
It's basically
it's the same method, get.
Yeah, you don't need to create custom serializer because it's just a matter of configuration. Depends on something, you will return something, so no need for that.
And now you dealt some group, admin group, and add it to the email. And then you will set here access control. It has to have role admin. So you can do either way, which suits you the best.
But it usually, if it is large application, you will probably build some admin API separated from your end user.
Do we have any more questions? Okay.
Is all clear with this CRUD with relations? Okay. Git checkout task 5.
Task 5, yes. Task 6. Now we want to add matches 1 number to get single player endpoint. So we can do this through the entity because we need to pull that from the database and add it to our player entity. So here operations, we already went through this, but we will do it again. So API platform has 2 types of operation, collection and item operation. So basically it creates a resource, a root, and a controller for us. for the operation. So collection operations are post and get collection. Item operations are get single object, put single object, delete single object. And now, if we want, we can define our own custom operation, which won't be just this CRUD basic operations, but something else. So how do we do that? Here is an example. If we want to add a result variable to our match. For example, we want some formatted view of the result. We don't want it like this, just player 1 points, player 2 points, but we want to show it all in one variable to display it on front end. So we have this virtual field. So this field is only present in the entity, but not in the database. So we won't add it to the ORM. And we will add group for reading, of course, because we want to show it. Next thing, we will create the custom operations. So how do we do that? We extend controller. It's just the same method, same action as it is for the Symfony routing. The only difference is that API platform, we automatically inject current object as a data parameter in your method. So, for example, we have here get match action. We define this route. So the path, the methods, defaults, controller is this method. It's all standard from Symfony. And here we have another 2 parameters of the API platform. We need to define which resource is this. This is match resource, and which operation name. This is a single operation name, get single item operation, which is get. And now API platform will get our object from the database, one match, and he will display it here. And now we can modify it, do whatever we want. We can format our result, set it to data, and return data. So you can see, usually in Symfony controller need to return a response object, but here we can return just a single object of the match. That's because API platform will hook on this and will serialize it for us and return it in the JSON LD response. Also, if we want, we can here return classical Symfony response, and then API platform will not do anything. We can serialize it as it wants. This is really similar as event listener. So it's after you get object from the database, you do some stuff on that, and then API platform continues to work. Okay, you will now try to create some custom operation. It's a task 6. So you want to add matches 1 number to get single player. First of all, you will add matches 1 field to player entity. You will add him normalization group so it gets shown on the response. Next thing, you will add this root. So with a new controller, class will be player, and this operation name. And then after you do that, you need to create this controller with this action. In that action, you can use a repository method. It's already written for you, so you don't have to write a query. You can just call it, get results, and save it to the player entity, and then just return a modified data object. You can find more info here on this documentation. You have example how to make it.
And it's quite easy way to modify the response of your object with this with this virtual property and things like that. You don't need to create subscriber, think about event or something like that. You just need to create controller, define it as custom action, and you can modify it your data and give it as a response to your user.
I will open this example so you can follow.
Do you have any questions regarding this part? Okay, great.
Okay, we will need to speed up a bit because we don't have many time, so I will show you the solution. You can check out task 6. So we needed to expose matches 1 to player. First thing we did, is we added this field matches1 and also getters and setters. And we added this player extra group for serialization. And then we define the root, get player root. Okay, we defined on which path it will be, which controller, resource class is player, and item operation name is get. Maybe you are confused with this operation name. We set this get. What it means, it reads here, item operation, and it reads this. If we, for example, called it get player, we would put here get player.
Yeah.
So it reads here from the resources.
And we lost a lot of time during debugging because we won't get error, but some of things won't work. So
Yes.
everything works, but for example, some extensions, we will see later what extension doesn't run properly. And then we debugged for 2 days or something like that, and we find that this name needs to be matched.
Yes. That it's not really clear when you read documentation, so you might get lost here. Okay, so this is the root, and this root now doesn't use the default operation, it uses our method. And here we needed to create that controller. We extended the Symfony standard controller and created this get player action. Here data is the player. Because we defined it as that our API resource needs to be player. We got player repository. I forgot to mention we have defined it as a service, so you can get it like this. You don't have to get Doctrine. And then from the player repository, we got matches1 and set it to data here. And then we returned the modified object. And then now API platform will serialize it with our new field in it. So that should be it. Okay, we'll now try it.
And this is the normal case that you have a virtual property that are not in your database but just created like this, because the client's application holds only presentation logic, so you need to send them who is the winner or how many matches he won. You want to send them the list of all matches, and then they will calculate how many wins or loses that player has. So usually this is something that you will use, like real example from real apps.
Okay, we will try to get single player. We don't have our field. We need to see what we did wrong here.
And one more notice, the usually good practice is also to put in annotation, like in description, up its virtual property. So when you are reading the code, you know it's not mapped in a database.
Okay. I did some changes, so I will go git revert. And I will clear my cache. Sometimes when you are changing these serialization groups and operations, you need to clear cache. So if something's not working, try that first.
Usually when you are messing with roots.
Okay. Okay, so here we have matches 1, 2. We can try some other player. He has matches 1, 3. So, do you have any questions? Is everything clear for this? Okay, we can go to the next task.
Just git checkout task 5.
Yes.
And we have 2 more tasks for today.
Git checkout task 6.
6, yeah, sorry.
You have it in the tasks file. How can you go to the solution at the bottom? So if you're not sure, just go there. Okay, for this task, we want to create a new endpoint which will return all the matches I was into. So we need to take currently logged in user and return all the matches he was in. So he could be player 1 or he could be player 2. So that's the condition. We need to check, so we need to get a currently logged user and check if he's one of those players. And how can we do that? We can do that with Doctrine extension. API platform has some basic query builder, which for collection always calls select all from, for example, matches table. And it returns all data that he found. But in most cases, you will need to add some extra conditions. So you don't have to write a new controller or custom actions or anything. You can write a Doctrine extension. So API platform calls get all from the database, and then you catch that query builder and you add some more conditions, and then API platforms returns to his flow. Okay, so we have two types of extensions. We can make extension for collection, and we can make extension for an item operation. And here is an example for get players. We here implemented the get players extension. We can see we implemented query collection extension interface and query item extension. We can also just extend one of those, whatever we want to do. So we need to implement these two functions, apply to item and apply to collection. Here we can see we have a query builder. That's the query builder that he already selected some data and we can hook up to. We have a resource class so that we know which resource we are working on, and operation name so that we can only call for certain operations. So this example, it only gets players from the database that are enabled. So we don't want to return in our response players that are not enabled, and then we made this extension. So first of all, we need to check if the resource class is player and the operation name is get, because we want to only call it to the get operation. Also be aware, it's saying like a listener, it will be called each time, so you have to have this early return. And if it's all okay, you can get a root alias from the query builder, and you add some condition. Here you can use that root alias, and you set that enabled should be true. And now you get only enabled users.
Just notice here that we put this private method addWhere, so we are using same to apply to collection and apply to item. You can have different kind of where conditions. So basically, you can select all the, for example, all the users, and only for item you can enable this where condition. So basically, you can mix it. It's not always like this.
Okay. This time we need to define it as a service. We need to put which classes we are talking about, and we need to set public to false. We don't have to, but it's good practice to set it. And we need to add a tag. So for collection, we need to add this query extension collection, and we need to put priority 9 in order to call it. If you don't put priority, it won't be called. And for the item, we need to put query extension item. Also, if you just want to add to collection or item, you will have one tag. Okay, now you will try to create the extension. That's task 7. So you want to create a new endpoint, get me matches, that will return all matches current user played. So you will create a new operation in the resources YAML. Here, matches. Here we have get matches, and here you will have, for example, get mine. And you will define the root, the path, and everything. So you can have a multiple collection operations. You don't have to only have these defaults. You will add in this path. Then you will create an extension. This time we will only call for a collection. We won't implement item extension. On the beginning, you need to check if the object is match, and you need to check if the operation name is getMine, and you define it as a service, set this tag, and then you just add some conditions you need for that.
Do you have any questions maybe about extensions? Okay, great.
I'll open this as an example if you want to check it out.
So basically, just define the extension class. You need to implement query collection extension.
And yes, and one more thing I forgot to mention, you can get current user from token storage. You have a service token storage, and you can call get token, get current user. So that's the way you just inject it through the constructor and then add it to the arguments when defining a service.
Yeah, same thing is with event subscribers. If you need user for any kind in events, you will inject token storage and you will get the user from token storage. So I started to talk, just define the extension class, apply, create these two public function and create some.
No, just one, because you want to apply to collection, you don't want to apply to item.
Yeah, sorry, my mistake. So just apply to collection and create your where condition and this is also part of API platform that is used
a lot. Now we will show the result. You check out task 7. So we needed to create the extension. We implemented query collection extension interface and injected token storage to get the current user. Here we have applied to collection. We first need to check if our resource is a match, and we need to check if our operation name is getMine. So we get a current user from the token storage with get token get user. We have a root alias, so we can build a query builder. And we on the basic query builder, which selects all, we add now and where player 1 or player 2 should be currently logged in user. Next thing, we need to define our new operation here in the resources. So this is getMine, method is get, and this is the path. And the service. So we need to put that the class is myMatches extension. It's not a public. We need to add this argument for token storage and add the tag that this is query extension collection and add priority. Now we can see if we created a new endpoint. Here it has. I think this user doesn't have anything. Yes, because we are logged in as admin. We need to log in as a usual user because he has some matches. So test at pingpong.dev and password. Don't forget to put form data here. Save. We return it back to JSON. And now we will try to see if this user has anything. Okay, he has these matches. So we can see here we are logged in as a test user. We can see this match has test user, this one too, and this. So every match we got is with the user currently logged in. So do you have any questions?
All clear.
Okay, for solution, just typing git checkout task 7. And the last one today is filters. API platform has some built-in filters. It will cover the most cases you will need. It's pretty easy to edit. You just need to define it as a service and add it to the resource. So how do they work? So now we saw that API platform has some basic query builder. We can add some conditions with extension, and after we get that, if we include any filters for that resource, it will add some more conditions to filter our response. Okay, here are some filters that are built in. So we have a search filter. It's for searching for in certain fields. So we can search partial. So if, for example, I can enter some substring and it will show me the result. I can, for start, I can type a substring that starts with that, and it will be shown in the results. Can use and. Exact is, so if I use exact, I need to enter exactly the same string to get the result for that field. And here we have I partial and I exact. Those are case insensitive. So if you enter uppercase and in the database is lowercase, it will be shown too. Then we have a date filter. So we can add give me all results that are before this and this date or after that date. Boolean filter, true, false, or 1 or 0. Numeric field, so you can add some number to filter. Range filter you can use, for example, give me all the results that are greater than 5 or greater than or equal than 5. And the order filter, you will usually have order filter on all your collections. You can enable some fields on which client can order his response. You can set if it will be by default ascending or descending. And if user doesn't define it, it will use default value. And if user defines it, it will use the one he entered. And if this all is not enough, you can define your custom filter. Okay, here's the example how we can use this in our API platform. We need to define it as a service. Here we have example for search, date, and order filter. So the search filter, first we need to add a parent. The parent needs to be the service of the filter type. So here we have a search filter service, date filter service, order filter. Next thing, we need to add arguments. So in arguments will be fields that will have this filter activated. So here we have a search filter. We can search this player by ID. We need to enter exact ID to get a result back. Email also needs to be exact, but the first name we can be just a substring. We don't need to enter full first name to get this result. And we need to add a tag, API platform filter. It's the same tag for all filters. And the ID player search. So this ID we need to add here in the resources. So we need to somehow connect our resource with the service. So we do it like this. So ID and add it here to attributes filters and put it here. And this we have datetime. We don't have any argument for the datetime because it's just a date. And order filter, here we activated first name, last name, and email for the player and put some default order. Okay.
I think we can do the task because we have only 10 minutes.
Okay, we will just check out the solution because we have 10 minutes left. So here is the goal. We will add search filter to player, and we will add date filter for the match. Okay. So git check out task 8 to see the solution. And here we have these filters. So search filter, parent search filter, we activate it for the first name, last name, and email. We have order filter for the player. We can order our player response by the first name, last name, and email. And the date and the filter for the match is by date time. And here we have those IDs. if we go to resources YAML, player, attributes, here we activated these two filters, and the match we activated this one filter. And now we should be able to test it. Get players, and here you have in the documentation all the filters that you activated, so now you can see what you can do, and also you can try that in the sandbox. For example, I can search by first name. We define it to be partial, so if we enter just some substring, we should get some results. So here we see in each first name we have this substring. And if we want maybe filtered by email, let's say this one, we should get only this result because email is unique. Now we have only one result. And also you can see that we have some Hydra tags here. You see for Hydra search, it's a standard. And we have all the filters enabled here. So the front end, when calls get me all players, they don't need to open this documentation. They can see right away in this response and use that filters and activate it on their front end. The order filter, we'll just remove this. We can use it like this. For example, to order it by the first name. And now we will see it's ordered descending on the first name. Okay, I cannot go any further with these filters because we are out of time. What is left is to show you some more features that we didn't try today, but we can just show you what else is there.
Yeah, sure.
These filters work directly on the queries today.
Yes.
Is there a possibility to throw in Elasticsearch maybe or something else?
Yes, you will use data providers if you want to use Elasticsearch. Antonio will show you now, but then you will need to implement all the logic for the filters by yourself, because these all filters and extensions are only working with the Doctrine query builder. But it's not very hard. You just need to implement filters and extensions that connect to the Elasticsearch instead of the Doctrine.
But maybe in the future it will be added out of the box. So I didn't actually put the slides with data providers, but but you mentioned it. So you can use data providers for any third-party data provider, and then you need to build some custom logic like pagination filtering and things like that. You lose these extension filtered things. Okay, regarding more features, we show you the Nailmia documentation. There is also Swagger documentation, but the problem with that is that you cannot extend documentation. You cannot add custom things to this documentation. That's the reason why we decided to show you the Nailmia, but this is how it looks like. And also there are some other formats you can also use. It's just a matter of configuration. But this is if you go to the demo.apiplatform.com, you will see this kind of documentation. There is still sandbox. You can test it in the same way as Nailmia documentation. There is also some per resource authorization mechanism. We show it today, but this is just how you can also define it. So for example, this is annotation definition. So per resource, I can say that only role admin can access to this resource because he is secure. But I can give access to the normal user to only item operation called get. So all the operation except the get can be accessed only by admin, and then normal user can go to item operation with operation get. That is also possible with just few lines of a code. You don't need to configure some complex extensions or listeners or things like that. Also, there is something new that is sub-resources support. Previously in version 2, for example, you need to create sub-resource by yourself. Now you just need to define that this class product has sub-resource, which is reviews, and then you need to define that is sub-collection. And you will get this kind of URL here. So product/1, this is ID of the product, /reviews, you will get all the reviews for that product. In previous version, in some of our projects, we did this manually. Also, there is cache, sorry, the slide, I'm missing some slides here. Sorry, I missed the slides with cache. There is HTTP bundle support. HTTP cache bundle from Symfony. You can configure it with just few lines of configuration, and it comes now in new version out of the box also with Varnish. So if you use Docker, for example, for development, that is part of the API platform repository, you will get immediately the cache and cache invalidation built-in, which is like really good feature. Also, if you want to write some tests out of the box, you can use Bhat or PHP unit or whatever, but you can use Bhat and Bhatch extension to make tests like this. It's quite easy to read, it's quite easy to write them. So basically you define when I set put request to people/1, with this body, my response should look like this. And you can write all the type of tests this way. Or of course you can use PHP unit, but this is like really easy to start testing your application or endpoints. Yeah. Also there are some more features like React.js. These apps are separate repositories. I have a problem with my software, sorry. So these okay, I will use this one.
So basically there are few applications like React-based admin generator. They are separated repositories on API platform, so you can use that. So React-based admin generator. Also there is React Redux Bootstrapper for creating the CRUD application to start with. There is also Angular support and integration with the Angular, and the latest 2.1 version also supports Symfony Flex. There is, in next 2 days, Ryan Weaver will talk about Symfony Flex. So that is something that the API platform supports already. Also, there is, I already told you that there is brand new Docker support inside repository, so you can start quite easy to test that with Docker. Also, there are some new features planned for version 2.2. 2.1 is in a beta phase now. So JSON API support, MongoDB native support, and GraphQL support. Basically, we are running out of the time. So thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us. We hope that you learned something. This is first time for us doing this workshop. And one little secret, this is actually the first time Paula doing any kind of the talk. I hope we were good, and I think she was impressive for the first time. So if you have any questions, we are here, or you can catch us in the lobby and ask whatever you want. You can rate our talk. Any feedback is appreciated, so thank you once again. Any questions?